The air tasted like recycled disappointment and cheap alcohol. Roy pushed his glass across the table, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light from the overhead fixtures. Across from him, Davis was halfway through his third drink, and Huang hadn't touched his at all. They came here every week, same time, same booth, same silence between them that spoke louder than words ever could. The drift wasn't much to look at. Just another forgotten bar on a forgotten station, where forgotten people tried to forget things they couldn't. The walls were stained with decades of smoke and spilled drinks. The chairs wobbled. The music was too loud and too old, but it was theirs in a way that nothing else had been for a long time. "She's coming over," Huang said quietly. Roy looked up. The young dragonfolk waitress was weaving between tables, balancing a tray with practiced ease. Her scales caught the light, shifting from deep purple to almost black depending on how she moved. She was young, maybe 20 in human years, though dragonfolk age differently. Her name tag said Lyra in 3 different languages. "Evening, gentlemen," she said, setting down fresh glasses. Her voice had that musical quality that dragonfolk voices always had, like wind chimes in a breeze. "Same as usual?" "Yeah, kid," Davis said, offering her a tired smile. "You know us too well." Lyra smiled back. She'd been working here for 6 months now, always polite, always curious about the 3 old humans who sat in the corner and spoke in half-sentences and meaningful glances. She'd asked them once what they did before. Roy had said military, and she'd nodded and never pushed further. "You have a good week?" she asked, wiping down their table even though it was already clean. "Same as any other," Roy said. He meant it kindly. His weeks were all the same now. "Wake up, try not to think about the past. Fail at not thinking about the past. Come here, drink, go home, repeat." Lyra hesitated, like she wanted to say something else. Then she noticed Roy's jacket hanging on the back of his chair. The patch on the shoulder was faded but still visible. EDF Relentless, Earth Defense Force, a ship name that meant something once. "That's a warship name, isn't it?" she asked. "The Relentless?" Roy felt Davis and Huang both go still. They didn't talk about the Relentless, not with outsiders, not even really with each other anymore. "Was," Roy said carefully. "Long time ago. She's scrapped now. Were you really on her?" Lyra's eyes were wide with genuine interest. "During the Procyon War?" "We were," Huang said. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. That was how Huang talked about the war. Like he was reading from a report. Lyra's face lit up. "That's amazing. My father would love to meet you. He collects things from that era. He has a whole hangar full of old ships and equipment. Lots of people collect war junk," Davis said. He wasn't being cruel, just stating fact. The Procyon War had ended 23 years ago. Long enough that people who weren't there thought it was history instead of memory. "Oh, but Father's collection is special," Lyra said proudly. "He has ships from both sides. Even some Earth ships. He has a big one, like yours. Same class, I think." She pointed at Roy's patch. "It has that same symbol on the side." Roy's hand froze halfway to his glass. "What?" "A ship like the Relentless," Lyra repeated, not noticing the change in atmosphere at the table. "Father says it's one of the most complete ones he's ever found. He got it from a salvage field years ago. It took him months to transport it back here." Davis leaned forward slowly. His face had gone pale. "What kind of ship exactly?" "I don't know all the technical names," Lyra admitted. "But it's big. Really big. Father calls it a dreadnought." The name is still on the side, but some of the letters are missing. It says Val something. The glass slipped from Roy's hand. It hit the table but didn't break, just rolled across the surface, spilling liquid everywhere. He didn't notice. He was staring at Lyra like she'd just told him the sun had gone dark. "Valiant," he whispered. "EDF Valiant. Yes. That's it." Lyra beamed, pleased that she'd remembered correctly. Then she noticed the way all 3 men were looking at her. The smile faded. "Did I say something wrong?" Huang had his hands flat on the table. His knuckles were white. Davis was gripping the edge of his seat hard enough that Roy could hear the material creak. Roy himself felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "The Valiant went down at Procyon Ridge," Roy said. His voice sounded distant, like it was coming from somewhere else. "With all hands. 812 crew members. She covered our retreat and took a direct hit to her reactor core. There wasn't anything left to salvage." Lyra's face went from confused to concerned. "But it's in my father's hangar right now. I've seen it hundreds of times. It's definitely there." That's impossible, Davis said, but his voice cracked on the last word. I can show you, Lyra offered quickly, worried now that she'd upset her favorite customers. Father loves showing off his collection. If you want to see it, I'm sure he'd let you visit. Maybe you could tell him stories about the ship. He'd really like that. Roy looked at Davis. Davis looked at Huang. Huang looked back at both of them. None of them said anything, but they didn't need to. They'd served together for 6 years on the Relentless. They knew each other's thoughts better than their own sometimes. The Valiant. Davis's younger brother had been on the Valiant. Engineering crew. His name was on the memorial wall back on Earth, along with 811 others. Davis visited that wall every year on the anniversary. Yeah, Roy said finally, his throat tight. Yeah, kid. We'd like to see that ship. Lyra smiled, relieved. She didn't understand why they looked so shaken. Didn't understand what she'd just done. Wonderful. I can take you tomorrow if you'd like. Father will be so excited to meet real veterans. She walked away to help other customers, leaving 3 old men sitting in stunned silence. It's not possible, Huang said quietly. She's young, Davis said. Maybe she's confused. Maybe it's a different ship. But Roy was already shaking his head. She described it perfectly. Same class, same name, same markings. The Valiant burned, Davis insisted. We saw it. We all saw it. We saw something explode, Roy corrected. We saw fire. But we were already jumping to FTL. We didn't see what happened after. The 3 of them sat there surrounded by the noise of the bar, the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. None of it touched them. They were somewhere else now. Somewhere cold and dark where good people had died and the universe had moved on without caring. Tomorrow, Huang said. We go tomorrow, the others nodded. Tomorrow they would see a ghost. Tomorrow they would face something they'd spent 23 years trying to forget. Tomorrow they would find out if the dead could come back to haunt them. Outside the bar, station life continued as normal. Ships came and went. People laughed and fought and loved and lost. The universe turned on its axis, uncaring and eternal. But in that small corner booth, 3 old soldiers felt time fold back on itself. The past wasn't past anymore. It was waiting for them in a hangar somewhere on this station, wearing the name of friends they'd thought were gone forever. The Valiant. Impossible. But Lyra had said it with such certainty, such innocence. She had no reason to lie. Roy picked up his glass with shaking hands and drank. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. It always did. Sleep didn't come easy for any of them that night. Roy lay in his small apartment staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows from passing ships outside his window. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Valiant. Not as it was supposed to be now, a scattered cloud of debris floating in deep space. He saw it as it had been. Proud, powerful, alive. Davis called him at 400 hours. Neither of them mentioned why they were both awake. They met Huang outside the drift at 600. The station was in its morning cycle, lights slowly brightening to simulate dawn. It was artificial, like everything else here, but people needed rhythms even in space. Lyra arrived 10 minutes later, cheerful and energetic in a way that made Roy feel ancient. She was wearing casual clothes instead of her work uniform, and she carried a small bag over her shoulder. Good morning. I told Father you were coming. He's very excited. She started walking and the 3 veterans followed. He doesn't get many visitors who actually served on the ships he collects. Usually it's just other collectors or historians. They moved through the station's corridors. The lower levels where the drift sat gave way to middle-class residential areas, then to something notably wealthier. The walls here were cleaner. The lighting was better. The air smelled like expensive recycling systems instead of cheap ones. Your family does well, Huang observed. It wasn't quite a question, Lyra shrugged. Father's collection is valuable. People pay a lot for authentic war relics. He sells some pieces, keeps others. She paused at a security checkpoint. The guard, a hulking insectoid creature, nodded at her and waved them through. He says he's preserving history. I think he just likes old things. The hangar entrance was impressive. Massive doors that could accommodate ships much larger than anything Roy had seen in civilian hands. Lyra pressed her hand to a scanner and the doors began to slide open with a deep mechanical rumble. Father, I brought guests, she called out as they stepped inside. The hangar was enormous. Ships of every size and configuration filled the space. Some were on display stands. Others were suspended from the ceiling by heavy cables. Roy recognized fighter craft from a dozen different conflicts, transport ships, even what looked like a pirate raider that had seen better days. "Lyra, my spark, I told you I was working on the thruster assembly." The voice came from somewhere above them. Then a massive shape dropped from one of the suspended ships, landing with surprising grace for something so large. Torvin was old. Dragonfolk could live for centuries, and this one had clearly lived through several. His scales were scarred and faded. One eye was cloudy with age, but he moved with authority, and his good eye was sharp as he looked at the three humans. "Veterans," he said. "It wasn't a question. I can always tell. Something in the way you stand. The way you look at things." He wiped grease from his claws onto a rag. "My daughter says you served on the Relentless." "We did," Roy said. He was trying not to stare at the ships around them, trying not to look for the one ship that shouldn't exist. "Dreadnought class. Good ships, strong." Torvin gestured around his collection. "I have 3 Earth fighters over there. A Covenant destroyer in the back. Even a Hive seed ship, though that one cost me a fortune and nearly got me arrested." He smiled, showing teeth. "But my prize, the one your young friend asked about, is this way." He led them deeper into the hangar, past ships that represented thousands of deaths, hundreds of battles, the collected debris of a war that had consumed a quarter of known space. Then they saw it. The Valiant sat in the back corner of the hangar, too large to fit anywhere else. She was massive, easily 200 meters from bow to stern. Her hull was scorched and pitted with battle damage. Her name was still visible on the side, though the letters were faded. EDF Valiant, serial number partially obscured by carbon scoring. Davis made a sound like he'd been punched. Huang stopped walking entirely. Roy felt his legs go weak. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Torvin said proudly. "Found her in a salvage field near Procyon 9. Took me 3 months and half my savings to transport her here. The exterior was easy to stabilize, but the interior security systems are beyond my skills. Never managed to get inside." "She went down at Procyon Ridge," Roy heard himself say. "There was an explosion. The reactor went critical." "We saw it." Torvin tilted his head, studying Roy. "You were there? At the battle? Our ship was the Relentless. The Valiant was our sister ship. She stayed behind to cover the retreat." Roy's hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets. "She saved us, all of us. 812 people died on that ship so we could get away. My brother was on her," Davis said. His voice was hollow. "Engineering section. Chief Petty Officer David Cross, he was 26. Torvin's expression changed. The pride faded, replaced by something more complicated. "I didn't know. The salvage rights were all legal. The field was registered as debris. No claims filed. You thought it was empty," Huang interrupted. "You thought everyone was already recovered." "Yes." Torvin looked at the ship with different eyes now, understanding what he really had. Not a prize. Atum Roy walked closer to the ship. His boots echoed on the hangar floor. The Valiant loomed over him, dark and silent. He reached out and touched the hull. The metal was cold, but it was real, solid. Not a ghost after all. "The explosion we saw," he said slowly, thinking it through. "If the reactor went critical, there shouldn't be anything left. Nothing this intact." "The reactor core is still there," Torvin said. "Damaged, but not detonated. I checked when I first acquired her. Wanted to make sure she wasn't a radiation hazard." Davis joined Roy at the hull. He pressed his palm against the metal. "Then what exploded? What did we see? And how did she end up in a salvage field near Procyon 9? Huang added, "The battle was at Procyon Ridge. That's 3 systems away." Lyra looked between them, confused. "I don't understand. Why does the location matter?" "Because ships don't move themselves," Roy said. He turned to Torvin. "You said you couldn't get inside. Do you still have the salvage documentation? The exact coordinates where you found her?" Torvin nodded slowly. "In my office. Why?" "Because something's wrong." Roy looked up at the Valiant, really looked at her. The damage patterns. The way the scoring on the hull ran. Ships that die in battle drift. They don't travel between systems. And that damage, it's not consistent with a reactor explosion. Davis was walking around the ship now, examining her from different angles. He'd been a damage control specialist on the Relentless. He knew what different types of weapons did to ship hulls. "These burns are from plasma weapons. short range, but there's no corresponding damage from the battle. No railgun impacts, no missile craters, just the plasma burns. And they're concentrated near the airlocks, Huang observed. He was at the far side of the ship now, like someone was trying to get in, or keep something in. The four of them stood there in the hangar, looking at a ship that shouldn't exist, that had damage that didn't make sense, that had somehow traveled 3 systems from where she died. Torvin broke the silence. I have override codes from the salvage company. Emergency access for situations like reactor instability. They might work. Roy met Davis's eyes, then Huang's. He saw the same thing in both faces. Fear, determination, the need to know. Open her up, Roy said. Lyra stepped forward. Wait, if something bad happened on that ship, if there are bodies inside, are you sure you want to see that? My brother is in there, Davis said quietly. I need to know what happened to him. I need to know why the official story doesn't match what we're seeing. Torvin moved to a control panel near the ship. His claws moved across the keys, entering codes. There was a long moment where nothing happened. Then, with a hiss of equalizing pressure, the main airlock began to open. Stale air rushed out, air that had been sealed inside for 23 years. It smelled like metal and decay and something else. Something wrong. The door finished opening. Darkness waited inside, but it wasn't empty darkness. Roy could see shapes in there, scattered objects. And on the floor near the entrance, visible in the light from the hangar, were dark stains that could only be one thing. Blood, dried and old, but definitely blood. That's not battle damage, Huang said. His voice was tight, controlled. That's execution. Roy pulled out his communicator and turned on its light. The beam cut into the darkness, revealing more. Blast marks on the interior walls, spent shell casings on the floor, signs of close quarters fighting. Whatever had happened to the Valiant, it hadn't happened during the battle. It had happened after, when she was alone and adrift, when everyone thought she was already dead. We need to go in there, Roy said. Davis nodded. Huang was already checking his pockets for anything useful. Torvin looked at his daughter. Lyra, stay here. This isn't something you should see. For once, Lyra didn't argue. She just nodded, her scales pale with growing understanding of what they'd found. The 3 veterans stepped into the darkness together. Behind them, the light from the hangar seemed very far away. Ahead, the Valiant waited to tell them her secrets. And Roy had a feeling they were secrets that someone had gone to great lengths to keep buried. The emergency lights still worked. They flickered on as the veterans moved deeper into the ship, casting everything in red. Red walls, red floors, red shadows. The Valiant remembered enough to know something was wrong, even after 23 years. Roy led the way. He'd spent 6 years learning the layout of the Relentless, and Dreadnought-class ships were all built the same. Every corridor in the same place, every door leading where it should. It was like walking through a mirror of his own past, except this mirror was broken, and it was full of ghosts. The first body was in the main corridor, slumped against a wall. The uniform was still recognizable, though time and vacuum had done their work. Junior officer. Navigation specialty, based on the rank insignia. There was a single bullet hole in the center of the chest. Clean. Professional. Execution style. Davis knelt next to the body. His jaw was tight. This wasn't combat. This was murder. They moved on. The ship told its story in blood and bullet holes. Crew members who'd been shot where they stood. Others who'd tried to run and didn't make it. The deeper they went, the worse it got. Huang found the armory. The door was open, bent outward like someone had blown the lock. Inside, most of the weapons were gone. But there were more bodies here. Marines, based on their uniforms. They'd tried to make a stand. It hadn't been enough. Whoever did this knew the ship layout, Huang said. He was examining the blast pattern on the door. They knew exactly where to hit to breach it fast, and they had military-grade explosives. Roy's communicator light swept across the walls. There were scorch marks everywhere. Signs of plasma weapons fired at close range. He stopped when the light caught something else. Writing. Someone had used their own blood to write on the wall before they died. Betrayed. They were ours. Look at this, Roy called out. Davis and Huang joined him. The 3 of them stood in silence, reading the same 2 sentences over and over. They were ours, Davis repeated. Meaning what? Coalition forces, allies. That's what it sounds like, Roy said. His stomach felt like lead. Someone on our side did this. They continued through the ship. The medical bay was full of bodies. Crew members who'd been wounded in the battle, too injured to fight back. They'd been killed in their beds. Roy had to step outside for a moment, forcing down the rage that threatened to choke him. The bridge was sealed. The heavy blast doors were still locked, which meant whoever had been inside had tried to protect it. It took Huang 20 minutes with Torvin's override codes to get them open. The bridge crew had lasted longer than the others. They'd barricaded themselves in, used furniture and equipment to create defensive positions. Shell casings littered the floor. But in the end, it hadn't mattered. They'd been overwhelmed. The captain was still in his chair. Captain Gerald Wright. Roy had met him twice before the battle. Good man, fair, cared about his crew. He died defending his ship with a pistol in his hand and determination on what was left of his face. Davis found what they were looking for, a small panel near the captain's chair, hidden from casual view. The ship's black box. Every vessel had one. It recorded everything. Every conversation on the bridge. Every sensor reading. Every order given. Will it still work? Roy asked. Davis pulled it free carefully. The casing was intact, designed to survive almost anything. Only one way to find out. Huang was at the communication station. His hands moved across the controls with the ease of old memory. Communications logs are still in the buffer. Last transmission was outgoing. To Coalition Command. Timestamp puts it 2 hours after the battle ended. What did it say? Huang pulled up the log. His face went pale as he read. Captain Wright reported they'd discovered evidence of theft. Military supplies being diverted from the supply fleet. Weapons, medical equipment, reactor cores. Billions in stolen material. He said he had proof. Said he was sending it through secure channels. Did he send it? Roy asked, though he already knew the answer. Transmission was interrupted. Someone jammed their communications right after. Huang looked at the black box in Davis's hands. If Wright had proof, it's in there. Roy looked around the bridge. At the bodies of men and women who'd done their duty. Who'd found something wrong and tried to report it. And been killed for it. They couldn't let the Valiant report, he said slowly, working it through. So they sent someone to silence the crew. Make it look like the ship was destroyed in battle. Then they moved her to a salvage field where she'd be found eventually. But by then it would just be another derelict. Another casualty of war. But why not destroy her completely? Davis asked. Why risk leaving evidence? Because dreadnoughts don't vanish, Huang said. Even if they're destroyed, there's debris. Radiation signatures. If the Valiant just disappeared, someone would investigate. But if she turned up later in a salvage field, well, that happens sometimes. Ships drift, get caught in gravity wells. It's believable enough that no one looks too close. Roy felt sick. They killed 800 people to cover up theft. Not just theft, Huang corrected. Look at the scale. Billions in equipment. That's not one person. That's an organized operation. Multiple people in the supply chain. Command structure. Maybe even political oversight. Davis stood up, cradling the black box. We need to get this analyzed. Find out what Wright found. They made their way back through the ship, past the bodies, past the evidence of massacre. The Valiant had one more story to tell, and they were going to make sure people heard it. Torvin and Lyra were waiting by the airlock. One look at the veterans' faces told them everything they needed to know. It's bad, Torvin said. Not a question. It's worse than bad, Roy said. He turned to Torvin. You said you bought this ship legally. From a salvage company. Do you still have the documentation? The name of the company? Who you dealt with? Torvin nodded slowly. In my office. But why does that matter? Because someone moved this ship here. Someone cleaned up the salvage field so it looked natural. Someone made sure the Valiant ended up somewhere she'd be found but not questioned. Roy's voice was hard. That salvage company, whoever ran it, they're part of this. Part of what? Lyra asked. Her voice was small. A cover-up, Davis said. He held up the black box. This ship found evidence of massive theft. Varprofitering. The crew tried to report it. They were murdered to keep them silent. Then the ship was hidden in a way that made it look like just another casualty. Torvin's expression changed. The color drained from his scales. The company that sold me the salvage rights. They paid me extra. Said they needed the salvage field cleaned quickly. They were very insistent about it. I thought it was just business. Who was it? Roy demanded. Who paid you? A company called Stellar Reclamation. They specialized in war salvage. Torvin paused. They shut down 5 years ago. The owner retired. Very wealthy. Very well connected. Name, Huang said. Torvin met his eyes. Coordinator Felix Delacroix. He was high up in coalition logistics during the war. After it ended, he started the salvage company. Made a fortune cleaning up the debris. The 3 veterans looked at each other. The same understanding passed between them. Delacroix had been in logistics. He would have had access to supply chains, the authority to move materials, the connections to cover it up. And after the war, he'd used his salvage company to clean up the evidence. Any ship that might have seen too much. Any crew that might have known too much. Where is he now? Roy asked. Retired on New Geneva, Torvin said. He's practically untouchable. Friends in government. Connections everywhere. I did business with him for years. He seemed honest. He murdered 800 people, Davis said. His voice shook with barely controlled rage. Lyra stepped forward. What are you going to do? Roy looked at the Valiant. At the ship that had kept her secrets for 23 years. At the tomb that had finally found someone to hear her story. We're going to make sure everyone knows what happened here, he said. We're going to make sure every one of these people gets justice, even if it takes the rest of our lives. Huang held up his communicator. I recorded everything. Every body. Every piece of evidence. The writing on the walls. All of it. And we have the black box, Davis added. Whatever Wright found, it's in here. Proof that even Delacroix can't deny. Torvin was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened up, decision made. I helped him. I didn't know what I was doing, but I helped him hide this. I cleaned up his crime scene. I took his money. He looked at the 3 veterans. I want to make this right. Tell me what you need. Money, connections, protection, whatever it takes. I have resources. Let me help. Why? Roy asked. Not accusatory, just curious. Because my daughter brought you here, Torvin said simply. Because she thought showing you an old ship would make you happy. Instead, she showed you the truth. And because I've spent years collecting the debris of war, thinking I was preserving history. But this isn't history. This is a crime scene, and these people deserve better than to be someone's collection. Lyra was crying quietly. All those people. They died and no one knew. No one cared. We care, Davis said gently. And now you care. And we're going to make sure the whole galaxy cares. Roy looked at his friends. At Torvin and Lyra. At the Valiant behind them. 23 years ago, this ship had saved his life. Had bought time with blood. Now it was his turn to return the favor. Let's get that black box analyzed, he said. And then let's burn Delacroix's world down. They left the hangar together. Behind them, the Valiant sat in darkness and read emergency light. But she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't forgotten. Her crew wasn't just names on a memorial wall anymore. They were victims. And victims deserve justice. Even if it took 23 years to get it. Huang knew a man. He always knew a man. 23 years out of the military. And he still had contacts in places that mattered. This particular contact worked in data recovery. The kind that dealt with military grade. Encryption and didn't ask too many questions about where the hardware came from. They met in a small shop 3 levels down from the drift. The sign outside said it repaired household electronics. Inside, past the front counter and through a hidden door, was a laboratory that could crack open the secrets of almost any system in known space. The man's name was Peter. He was old, older than the veterans, with hands that shook slightly until they touched a keyboard. Then they became steady as stone. Military black box, Peter said, examining the device Davis had placed on his workbench. Dreadnought class. War-era encryption. Where did you find this? Does it matter? Roy asked. Peter looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, showing gaps where teeth used to be. No, I suppose it doesn't. He connected cables to the black box. Screens lit up around him, showing scrolling code. This will take time. The encryption is multi-layered, designed to prevent tampering. How much time? Davis asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Peter's fingers were already moving across keys. Come back then. I'll have everything extracted and cleaned up. Audio logs, sensor data, everything that box saw and heard. They left him to his work. Outside, the station was moving through its evening cycle. Lights dimming. Crowds thinning. Roy felt exhausted, but he knew sleep wouldn't come easy. Not with what they'd seen. Torvin had given them access to his private files. Everything related to the purchase of the Valiant. Every communication with Stellar Reclamation. Every document with Delacroix's signature or seal. The old dragon had been thorough, and now that thoroughness might be the thing that brought down a man who thought he was safe. They worked in shifts over the next 2 days. Roy took the financial records. Davis handled the communications logs. Huang mapped out the timeline connecting events and movements. Slowly, piece by piece, the full picture emerged. It had started small. Medical supplies diverted from the fleet. Not enough to notice. Just a few percentage points that could be explained as combat losses. Then weapons, ammunition, ship components. The operation had grown over months, stealing from the military while a war was being fought. Delacroix had been perfect for it. He'd controlled logistics for an entire sector. He decided what went where, what was surplus, what was damaged beyond repair. He'd made millions selling equipment that was supposed to be destroyed. Equipment that soldiers needed, that people died for the lack of. The Valiant had discovered it by accident. A routine supply check during the battle. Inventory numbers that didn't match what they'd received. A junior officer had noticed and reported up the chain. By the time it reached Captain Wright, the Valiant was alone in space, damaged from the battle, waiting for rescue. Wright had put it together, had accessed the supply network and seen the pattern, had documentation, proof. He'd sent a priority message to Coalition Command explaining what he'd found, asking for instructions. Someone had received that message, someone with access to command networks, someone who'd immediately contacted Delacroix. And Delacroix had sent his cleanup crew. They used a ship with Coalition transponder codes, Huang said, reading through Torvin's communications. That's how they got close to the Valiant without raising alarms. The crew thought it was their rescue. Roy felt bile rise in his throat. They opened their airlocks, welcomed them aboard, and were shot for it. Not all at once, Davis added. He was looking at the timeline. The black box will confirm it, but based on the evidence, they took several hours. Systematically going through the ship, making sure no one survived, making sure no evidence remained except what was in the black box. Then they moved the ship, Roy said. Probably used a heavy tug. Transported her to the salvage field near Procyon 9. Staged it to look like she'd drifted there naturally. Huang pulled up a star map. 3 systems. That's a week of travel minimum, even with a fast tug. They had time to plan. Time to make sure everything looked right. By the time anyone might have wondered why the Valiant hadn't been found, she was exactly where they wanted her. And then Delacroix bought the salvage rights to the entire field, Davis said. Paid Torvin to clean it out. Made sure every ship was accounted for. Made sure nothing was left that might raise questions. Peter called them on day 3. His voice on the communicator was tired but satisfied. Got everything. You need to see this. They crowded into his workshop. The screens showed audio waveforms, sensor logs, communication transcripts. Peter had organized it all, compiled it into a timeline that was easy to follow. I'll let it speak for itself, he said, and pressed play. Captain Wright's voice filled the room. Calm, professional, reporting what he'd found to Coalition Command. Requesting investigation, asking what to do with the evidence he'd compiled. Then hours later, another voice. The communications officer. Captain, we have an incoming ship. Coalition codes. They're hailing us. Say they're here to assist with repairs. Excellent. Grant them docking permission. Sound of airlocks connecting. Footsteps on metal. Then weapons fire, screaming. Wright's voice no longer calm, shouting orders. Return fire. Defend the bridge. Get the black box secured. The battle inside the ship lasted 30 minutes. The recordings caught it all. The desperate defense. The crew fighting with whatever they had. The systematic execution of everyone they found. Wright's final words whispered into the black box before they breached the bridge. This is Captain Gerald Wright of the EDF Valiant. We've been boarded by hostile forces using Coalition codes and equipment. They're killing my crew. If anyone finds this, the evidence is in Data Core 3. Delacroix. Coordinator Felix Delacroix. He's stealing from the fleet. We found proof. He sent them to silence us. Don't let him. The recording ended in gunfire. The workshop was silent. Peter looked away, his old eyes wet. The 3 veterans stood frozen, listening to the death of people they'd known. People they'd served alongside. People who'd died because they'd tried to do the right thing. Roy's hands were shaking. Davis was crying silently. Huang's face was a mask of cold rage. "There's more," Peter said quietly. He brought up another file. The data core Captain Wright mentioned. "It's all here. Financial records, communication logs, every transaction Delacroix made, every ship he stripped, every piece of equipment he stole. It's enough to put him away for 1,000 years. Will it hold up legally?" Roy asked. His voice sounded distant. "It's military-grade evidence from a ship's black box. It can't be faked, can't be altered. Any court in Coalition space will accept it as absolute proof." Peter disconnected the cables carefully. "But you need to understand something. Delacroix is powerful. He has friends. If you go after him with this, he'll fight back. He'll use every resource he has. People might get hurt. People already got hurt," Davis said. 812 of them. 23 years ago, and no one knew. No one cared. That ends now. Roy took the black box. It felt heavier than before. Not physically, but knowing what it contained. What it represented. The last words of dying people. Proof of betrayal. Evidence of murder. "We need to go public," Huang said. "All at once. Multiple news networks. Government investigators. Military command. Everywhere. If we give Delacroix any warning, he'll have time to spin it. To use his connections. We need to hit him before he knows what's happening." "Torvin can help with that," Roy said. "He has contacts, money. He can make sure the information gets where it needs to go." They returned to Torvin's compound. The old dragon listened to the recordings with his eyes closed. When they finished, he sat in silence for a long time. "I helped him do this," he said finally. "I took his money. Cleaned up his crime. I thought I was just doing business." "You didn't know," Lyra said. She'd listened too. Her scales were pale with shock. "That doesn't make it better." Torvin looked at the veterans. "But I can help make it right. I have reporters I trust. Investigators who owe me favors. We can coordinate a release, make sure the information hits everywhere at once. Before Delacroix can react." "How long?" Roy asked. 2 days to set it up properly. I need to contact people. Make arrangements. Ensure the information is distributed in a way that can't be stopped or suppressed." Torvin stood. "But once we start this, there's no going back. Delacroix will know who released it. He'll come after all of us. Let him come," Davis said. His voice was cold. "I want him to know it was us. I want him to know that the brother of one of his victims brought him down. I want him to see our faces when they take him away." Roy looked at his friends, at Torvin and Lyra, at the black box in his hands. 2 days ago, they'd been 3 old veterans drinking in a bar. Forgotten, irrelevant. Now they were about to shake the foundations of the coalition government. "Do it," he said. Torvin nodded. "Then we have work to do. Lyra, start compiling the full evidence package. Everything. The black box recordings, the financial data, the communications logs. Make copies, multiple copies. Store them in different locations. If something happens to us, this information needs to survive." "What about the Valiant herself?" Huang asked. "She's evidence too. Once this goes public, people will want to see her." "Investigate her. She stays here," Torvin said firmly. "Under guard. No one touches her without proper authority. She's a war grave now. She deserves respect." They worked through the night, building the case, preparing the evidence, making copies and backups. By dawn, they had everything ready. The full story of what happened to the Valiant. The proof of Delacroix's crimes. The recordings of dying people asking for justice. Roy stood in Torvin's office looking out at the station beyond the window. Somewhere out there on a wealthy planet, Delacroix was living in luxury built on stolen goods and murdered witnesses. He thought he was safe, thought his crimes were buried. In 2 days he'd learn otherwise. In 2 days the galaxy would know what he'd done. And 812 names would finally mean something more than just casualties of war. They'd mean justice. The reporters arrived first. 3 of them, from different networks. Torvin had chosen carefully. People he trusted. People who couldn't be bought or intimidated. They sat in his office and listened to the recordings. Their faces changed as they understood what they were hearing. "This is going to be the biggest story of the decade," one of them said. Her name was Patricia, and she'd been covering military affairs for 30 years. "Delacroix isn't just anyone. He has connections all the way to the top of coalition government. That's why we need you," Roy said. "We release this ourselves, it gets buried. It comes from established journalists with reputations. People have to pay attention. The second reporter, a young man named Aaron, was reviewing the financial data. This goes beyond Delacroix. There are other names here, suppliers, transport companies, military officers who looked the other way. This is going to bring down dozens of people. Good, Davis said. They all deserve it. The third reporter was oldest. His name was Michael, and he'd covered the Procyon War from the front lines. He was looking at the list of crew members from the Valiant. I knew some of these people. Interviewed them before the battle. They were good soldiers, good people. He looked up at the veterans. You're sure about this? Once we run this story, your lives change. People will know your names. You'll be targets. We're already targets, Wang said. We just didn't know it until now. Everyone who served on ships near the supply lines, everyone who might have noticed something wrong, we were all at risk. The only difference is now we're fighting back, Patricia stood. We need to coordinate the release. All 3 networks at the same time. That way no one can claim exclusive or try to spin it their way. The story speaks for itself. Agreed, Aaron said. I'll need 24 hours to verify the evidence independently. My network won't run something this big without their own fact-checking, no matter how solid it looks. We all will, Michael added. But from what I've seen, this is airtight. Military black box recordings can't be faked. The financial trail is documented. The physical evidence is sitting in a hangar 3 levels down. This is real. They left to begin their work. Torvin watched them go, then turned to the veterans. What we're doing now, there's no taking it back. Are you certain this is what you want? Roy thought about Captain Wright, whispering his final words into a black box. About Davis's brother murdered in engineering. About 812 people who died because they tried to do the right thing. I'm certain, he said. The next 24 hours were the longest of Roy's life. They stayed in Torvin's compound, not wanting to be seen. Not wanting to give Delacroix any warning that something was coming. Lyra brought them food and tried to keep their spirits up. But the waiting was hard. Huang spent the time making copies of everything, storing data in locations across the station and beyond. If something happens to us, this information needs to survive, he said. Too many people died to keep it secret. Davis was quiet. He kept looking at his brother's name on the crew manifest. Roy found him once in the middle of the night, just staring at it. He was supposed to retire after the war, Davis said. He had plans. Going to buy a ship. Do transport runs in peaceful sectors. Maybe meet someone. Start a family. He looked at Roy. He never got the chance because someone wanted to get rich. He's going to get justice, Roy promised. All of them are. On the second day, Patricia called. We're ready. All 3 networks are running the story at 1800 hours station time. That's 2 hours from now. After that, everyone will know. Roy, Davis, and Huang gathered in Torvin's office. Lyra joined them. Torvin stood by the window looking out at the station. At 1800, he turned on the screens. All 3 networks had the story as their lead. The faces of the reporters they'd met appeared on screen. Behind them were images of the Valiant, of the black box, of the evidence that couldn't be denied. Tonight we bring you exclusive evidence of what may be the largest military corruption scandal in coalition history, Patricia began. Her voice was steady, professional. 23 years ago, the EDF Valiant was declared lost in the Battle of Procyon Ridge. 812 crew members were listed as killed in action, but we've learned that's not what happened. The Valiant survived the battle. Her crew didn't die as heroes. They were murdered to cover up massive theft from the military supply chain. The other networks had similar openings. All of them played excerpts from the black box. Captain Wright's voice. His final words. The sound of his crew dying. It was impossible to listen to without feeling it. Then came the financial evidence. The shipping manifests. The communications logs. Everything laid out in simple terms that anyone could understand. Delacroix's name. His company. His connection to the murders. The screens showed footage of the Valiant herself. Torvin had allowed cameras inside. They showed the bodies, the blood, the evidence of execution. It was hard to watch, but it needed to be seen. Roy found himself crying. Not from sadness, from relief. Finally, after 23 years, the truth was out. Finally, those 812 people were more than just names on a wall. They were victims, and everyone knew it. The story ran for 2 hours. Interview with the veterans, Statement from Torvin admitting his unknowing role. Expert analysis of the evidence. All of it damning. All of it undeniable. Then the responses started coming in. The coalition government issued a statement within an hour. They were opening an immediate investigation. Military police were being dispatched to New Geneva to detain Delacroix for questioning. Other names from the evidence were being located and arrested. Human Earth government released their own statement. They demanded full accountability, called for a transparent investigation, promised justice for the crew of the Valiant. Social networks exploded. The story was everywhere. People were outraged, angry, demanding answers. The name Felix Delacroix went from respected to reviled in a matter of hours. And then Delacroix himself made a mistake. He tried to issue a denial. Called the evidence fabricated. Claimed he was being framed by political enemies. It was exactly the wrong thing to do. It made him look guilty, desperate. By midnight, military police had arrived at his estate on New Geneva. The news networks had cameras there. Everyone watched as Delacroix was led out in restraints, still proclaiming his innocence. Still claiming it was all lies. But nobody believed him. The evidence was too strong. The recordings too clear. The financial trail too well documented. They got him, Huang said quietly. They were still in Torvin's office watching the screens. Actually got him. It's not over yet, Roy cautioned. He'll get lawyers. He'll fight. This could take years. But he's not free anymore, Davis said. He's not safe. He's going to face justice. That's more than those 812 people got. Over the next few days, more arrests came. Supply officers who'd helped with the theft, transport captains who'd moved stolen goods, corporate executives who'd bought equipment they knew was stolen. The investigation spread wider than anyone had expected. Some of those arrested tried to make deals. They gave up names, provided evidence of other crimes. The whole rotten structure that Delacroix had built began to collapse. The veterans became famous overnight. Their faces were everywhere. People wanted to interview them, hear their story, understand how 3 old soldiers had brought down such a massive conspiracy. Roy hated it. The attention, the cameras, the people treating them like heroes when all they'd done was tell the truth. But he endured it because it kept the story alive, kept pressure on the investigators, made sure Delacroix couldn't slip away. One interview stood out. A reporter asked Roy why he'd done it. Why risk everything to expose something that happened decades ago? Because they were my people, Roy said simply. The crew of the Valiant. They served with honor. They tried to do the right thing. And they were killed for it. Someone needed to speak for them. Someone needed to make sure they weren't forgotten. Do you think you'll get justice for them? Roy thought about Captain Wright, about Davis's brother, about 812 names that now meant something. We already have, he said. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth, about making sure people know what happened, about honoring those who died. He looked directly at the camera. The crew of the Valiant has been heard. Their story is known. That's justice. The interview went viral. It was shared millions of times. People quoted Roy's words, made them into images and posts. The crew of the Valiant became a symbol, not just of the victims of corruption, but of the importance of speaking truth, of standing up even when it's hard, of remembering. Davis finally got to hold a proper memorial for his brother. Not just a name on a wall, but a real service with full military honors attended by hundreds of people who wanted to pay their respects. The other crew members received similar honors. Families who'd mourned for 23 years finally had closure. The Valiant herself became a memorial. Torvin donated her to Earth's military museum. She was transported with full ceremony, restored on the outside but left untouched inside. A reminder of what had happened, a warning against letting it happen again. Roy, Davis, and Huang attended the dedication ceremony. Thousands of people came to see the ship, to walk through her corridors, to understand what had been done. Standing on the viewing platform, looking at the Valiant one last time, Roy felt something he hadn't felt in 23 years. Peace. They'd done what they set out to do. They'd honored the dead. They'd exposed the guilty. They'd made sure the truth was known. The Valiant had saved them once 23 years ago, by holding the line long enough for them to escape. Now they'd save the Valiant by making sure her story was told, by giving her crew the honor they deserved. It was enough. 6 months later, Roy walked into the Drift and found his usual booth empty. It felt strange. For years, this had been his place, his routine. Come here every week, drink with Davis and Huang, talk about nothing important, go home. Simple, predictable, safe. Everything had changed. He ordered his drink and sat down. The bartender, an old Centaurian who'd seen too many wars, nodded in recognition. "Saw you on the news again," he said. "They're saying the trial starts next month." "That's what they tell me," Roy replied. The Delacroix trial. It had become the most watched legal proceeding in coalition history. 17 defendants, hundreds of charges, mountains of evidence. It would take months to sort through it all. "You going to testify?" "If they need me to." Roy took a sip of his drink. "But the evidence speaks for itself. The black box recordings, the financial data. They don't need me to tell them what happened." The bartender moved on to help other customers. Roy sat in the quiet corner, thinking about how different his life was now. The interviews had mostly stopped, but people still recognized him. Still wanted to shake his hand. Thank him. Tell him how brave he was. He didn't feel brave. He just felt tired. "Mind if I sit?" Roy looked up. Lyra stood there with a tray, but she wasn't working. She wore casual clothes and carried a bag over her shoulder. "Of course," he said. "You off duty?" "I don't work here anymore," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I'm leaving. Heading to Earth. Starting university next month." Roy smiled. "That's good. What are you studying?" "History. Military history specifically. I want to make sure stories like the Valiant don't get lost, that people remember why truth matters." She paused. "Father's paying for it. He says it's the least he can do. After everything, how is he?" "Better." The legal charges against him were dropped. The prosecutor said he was a victim of Delacroix's deception, not an accomplice. But he's still struggling with the guilt. Lyra looked down at her hands. "He's been working with military historians, helping them catalog his collection, making sure every piece has proper documentation. Every crew member remembered." "That's good work," Roy said. "He wants to talk to you before I leave." "If you have time," Roy nodded. "I'll stop by." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The bar filled up around them. People laughing, drinking, living their lives, not knowing or caring about old wars and older crimes. Maybe that was how it should be. "I wanted to thank you," Lyra said finally. "When I first told you about the ship, I thought I was just making conversation, telling you about my father's collection. I didn't know what it would lead to. Neither did we. But you pursued it anyway. You could have walked away, let the past stay buried. But you didn't. You made sure those people were remembered, that their families got closure, that justice was done." She looked at him with those large dragon eyes. "You changed things, made them better. That matters." "We just told the truth," Roy said. "That's all. The truth was always there. We just made sure people heard it." Lyra smiled. "Father says that's what makes humans special. You don't let things go. You hold on to what matters. You fight for it." Roy thought about that, about humanity's reputation in the galaxy, about how other species saw them, stubborn, relentless, unable to let go. Maybe it was true. Maybe that was their strength. The door opened. Davis walked in, followed by Huang. They spotted Roy and headed over. "There you are," Davis said. "Thought you might have started without us." "Just getting here myself," Roy said. "Look who I found." Davis and Huang greeted Lyra warmly. She'd become part of their group over the last 6 months. Honorary crew, as Roy had once joked. She'd earned it. Helped them every step of the way. Never wavered even when things got dangerous. "So you're really leaving," Davis said. "Going to miss having you around." "I'll visit," Lyra promised. "And you can come to Earth. See the Valiant in her new home. They've made it beautiful. A real memorial. People come from all over to see her." "We should do that," Huang said. "Take a trip. Pay our respects properly." They ordered drinks and fell into easy conversation. Lyra told them about her university program. Davis shared news about his brother's memorial foundation. Huang talked about his volunteer work with veterans groups. Life had moved on, but it had moved on in good ways. Eventually, Lyra had to leave. She said her goodbyes, making them promise to stay in touch. They watched her go, this young dragon who'd accidentally changed their lives. "Good kid," Davis said. "The best," Roy agreed. They drank in silence for a while. Then Huang spoke up. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't gone to see that ship?" If we just let it go? All the time, Roy admitted. We could have kept living our quiet lives. Drinking here every week. Talking about nothing. Growing old in peace. Would that have been better? Davis asked. Roy thought about Captain Wright. About those final words recorded in the black box. About 812 people who'd finally gotten their story told. About families who'd gotten closure. About Delacroix sitting in a cell waiting for trial. No, he said. It wouldn't have been better. It would have been easier. But not better. Good, Davis said. Because I'm glad we did it. Glad we saw it through. My brother deserved that. They all did. Huang raised his glass. To the Valiant. And her crew. They drank to that. Then they drank to other things. To Lyra and her future. To Torvin finding redemption. To justice finally served. To the truth being heard, the bar filled up around them. The music got louder. The night grew late. But the three veterans stayed in their corner booth, same as always. Except nothing was the same. They weren't just three forgotten soldiers anymore. They were the people who'd refused to let injustice stand. Who'd fought for the dead when no one else would. Roy looked at his friends. Really looked at them. Davis, who'd lost a brother but gained closure. Huang, who'd used his skills to crack open a conspiracy. They'd all changed, grown. Found purpose again after years of just existing. You know what's funny? Roy said. We spent 23 years trying to forget the war. Trying to move on. Live quiet lives. And in the end, we had to go back to it. Had to face it, to make peace with it. That's not funny, Davis said. That's just how life works. Can't move forward if you're dragging ghosts behind you. We freed the ghosts, Huang said quietly. Gave them peace. Let them rest, Roy nodded. That was exactly what they'd done. The crew of the Valiant weren't ghosts anymore. They were people, remembered, honored, at peace. The bar began to close. The bartender started cleaning up. The three veterans finished their drinks and stood. They paid their tab and headed for the door. Outside, the station was quiet. The lights were dim for the night cycle. A few people moved through the corridors, but most were already home or headed there. Same time next week? Davis asked. Same time, Roy confirmed. Always, they went their separate ways. Roy walked back to his apartment through familiar corridors. But he saw them differently now. The station wasn't just a place to hide from the past anymore. It was a place where he'd found purpose, where he'd made a difference. His apartment was small and simple. One room, basic furniture, nothing special. But it felt more like home now than it had in years. He poured himself a small drink and sat by the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was the Valiant. In a museum on Earth, being visited by thousands of people, her story being told. Her crew remembered. That was worth everything they'd been through. All the stress, all the danger, all the attention. Roy thought about tomorrow, about the trial coming up, about the testimony he might have to give, about facing Delacroix in person and telling him what he'd done, what he'd taken, who he'd killed. He wasn't afraid, wasn't nervous. He'd faced worse things in the war. And he had something Delacroix didn't. He had the truth. He had 812 people standing behind him. He had justice on his side. The drink was good. Not great, but good enough. Roy raised it toward the stars. Toward wherever the Valiant was now. Toward the memory of people who died trying to do the right thing. We kept our promise, he said softly. You weren't forgotten. You weren't just casualties. You were people. And everyone knows it now. Everyone remembers the stars didn't answer, but they didn't need to. Roy knew in his heart that somewhere, somehow, the crew of the Valiant knew what had been done for them. Knew that 3 old veterans and a young dragon waitress had refused to let them be forgotten. It was enough. More than enough. It was justice. It was honor. It was the truth finally being heard after 23 years of silence. Roy finished his drink and went to bed. He didn't have nightmares that night. Didn't dream of battles or explosions or friends dying in the dark. He slept peacefully, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing, that you stood up when it mattered, that you made a difference. In the morning, he'd wake up and continue his life. Maybe do another interview. Maybe prepare for the trial. Maybe just live quietly for a while. Whatever came next, he'd face it. Because he'd learned something important over the last 6 months. The past didn't have to haunt you. You could face it. Deal with it. Make peace with it. and then move forward stronger than before. The Valiant had saved his life 23 years ago, and now he'd saved hers, her legacy, her crew's memory. It was a fair trade. A good trade. Outside his window, the station continued its eternal rotation. Ships came and went. People lived their lives. The universe turned on its axis, uncaring and eternal. But in one small apartment, one old veteran slept peacefully, knowing that justice had been done, and in a museum on Earth, a warship named Valiant stood as a memorial. Not to war, not to death, but to truth, to courage, to the importance of remembering, to the people who'd tried to do the right thing and paid for it with their lives. Their story was told now, their sacrifice remembered, their names honored. After 23 years of silence, they had finally been heard. And that, Roy thought as he drifted off to sleep, was exactly what they deserved.